The day I got laughed at, it was raining. Not the dramatic kind of rain you see in war movies, not sheets of it, not sideways needles of water that blur everything into gray watercolor. This was the Pakistan border region's particular brand of misery, a cold, persistent drizzle that got into everything. Into your collar. Into your boots. Into the folds of your ears. It sat on top of the mud instead of mixing with it, so the whole FOB smelled like wet clay and diesel and something older underneath both of those things, something that had been in the ground a long time. I remember that smell because I was standing in it when Sergeant Waqas Mirza laughed at me. Not cruelly. I want to be fair about that. He wasn't a cruel man. He laughed the way men laugh when something surprises them so completely that amusement is just the body's first response before the brain catches up. He was holding a clipboard, and, when I told him what I needed, his pen stopped moving and he looked up and the laugh came out short, genuine, the kind you don't plan. Repeat that, he said. I need a requisition for the DSR-1, I said. The precision variant. And, I need it logged under my call sign. He looked at me for a long moment. Behind him, two of the guys from 3rd Platoon were cleaning their rifles under the corrugated tin overhang. And, one of them, I didn't look to see who let out a low whistle that was somehow worse than the laugh. My name is Lance Corporal Zara Khalid. I was 23 years old. I had been in country for 6 weeks, attached to a forward reconnaissance unit operating out of a base that doesn't appear on public maps. I had a spotter qualification, a sharpshooter badge from training, and a request that nobody in that camp thought belonged to me. That's a sniper rifle, Waqas said. Not accusatory. More like he was explaining something I might have missed. I know what it is. We have 2 already assigned. To Hader and, to a Hader's been pulling a shoulder strain for 2 weeks, I said. He's shooting 20% left on the range. And, the second is in maintenance. Has been for 9 days. He looked back down at his clipboard. His jaw moved in a small, chewing motion that I'd come to understand meant he was thinking and didn't want to show it. I'll pass it up, he said. Don't hold your breath. I didn't say anything to that. I walked back through the drizzle to the women's billet, which was a repurposed storage container with 2 cots in it, and sat on the edge of my bunk and unlaced my boots because there was water in them. I set them upside down on the floor to drain. I looked at the wall, which had someone's old safety regulation poster still taped to it, half curled at the corner. I was not holding my breath. But I wasn't letting go of it either. I should tell you how I got here. Not the whole story would take 3 days and 2 bottles of something strong. But, the shape of it, the outline. My father was Army. My grandfather was Army. My grandmother used to say our family tree grew in parade formation. I grew up with the smell of gun oil the way other kids grow up with the smell of their mother's cooking, not nostalgic, exactly, just foundational. The smell of a thing that means home even when home is hard. I applied to the officers program 3 times. The first time I was told my file was incomplete. The second time I passed every physical, every written exam, every psychological screen, and was then told there had been a restructuring and my intake class was deferred. The third time I made it further than I had before, further than most, and I sat in a room across from a board of 4 men who looked at my scores and looked at me and then looked at each other in the particular way that doesn't need translation. I joined as an enlisted soldier. I told myself it didn't matter what door I came through. I still believe that. On most days. I had taught myself to shoot on my father's range when I was 15. Not the standard service drills, taught myself, the obsessive kind, the kind where you stay until your shoulder is bruised and the brass casings around your feet are a whole season's worth of afternoons. I studied trajectory. I read about wind drift. I understood what my father understood, which is that a rifle is not a weapon first, it's a physics problem. A conversation between you and gravity and distance, and if you listen carefully enough, if you're patient enough, you can say exactly what you mean. The Army didn't know what to do with that in a woman. So I waited. I kept shooting. I kept my mouth mostly shut. I waited for a moment that would ask for what I actually had. What I didn't know, in that storage container with the rain ticking on the metal roof, was that the moment was already in motion. Had been in motion since the previous day. I just hadn't been told yet. His name was Major Ariftour, and he came to find me the next morning. The rain had stopped. The camp was doing that thing it always does after rain in that region, steaming slightly, the mud beginning to crack at the edges near the walls where the sun hit first. I was on perimeter maintenance duty, which meant I was walking the fence line with a radio that crackled static every 4 minutes like clockwork. Khalid. I stopped walking. Turned. He was a compact man, Major Tour. Economical, that's the word. He moved like he'd calculated the exact amount of energy required for every action and refused to spend more than that. He had the kind of face that didn't give you anything for free. Yes, sir. Walk with me. We walked. He didn't speak for 30 meters, which was enough time for me to decide that this was either very good or very bad, and I couldn't tell which. You put in for the DSR-1, he said finally. Yes, sir. Why? Not why did you think you were qualified. Not who authorized you to. Just, why? The cleanest version of the question. Because there's a gap, I said. And I can fill it. What gap? Intel from FOB Larkana has a pattern. Elevated movement at the ridgeline. Khwaja Pass sector, grid 47. Same 3-day cycle. They're moving something, the size suggests personnel, not cargo, and they're doing it at first light because they know our UAV rotation. Somebody who can sit on that ridge at night and be positioned by 0400 can answer the question of what's moving and whether it needs to be stopped. He was quiet again. That analysis, he said. Where did you get it? I put it together myself. I've been watching the patrol logs. And the UAV footage summaries, the ones in the open shared drive. It's all there, sir. You just have to read across them instead of individually. He stopped walking. Looked at the horizon. The mountains to the northwest were the color of old bone in the morning light. Mirza told me you quoted Hayter's shoulder injury. It's relevant, sir. It's also something Hayter doesn't know you noticed. I didn't answer that. Did you tell anyone else about this analysis? He asked. No, sir. He turned and looked at me directly for the first time. His eyes were very still, not cold, not warm. Just very present. Don't, he said. I need 24 hours. Then, he walked back the way we'd come, and I stood on the perimeter with my crackly radio and the steaming mud and the mountains, and I thought, okay. The 24 hours were the longest of my deployment. Not because I was afraid, exactly. Fear is something I understand. I can put my hands around fear and hold it still. What I had was something more unpleasant than fear. It was the particular tension of not knowing whether you are about to be taken seriously, which is its own kind of weight because it's been so long since that felt like a realistic possibility that you don't know how to carry the hope of it. I ate. I ran the perimeter. I cleaned my service weapon even though it didn't need cleaning. I slept badly and woke at 0300 and lay in the dark listening to Corporal Senna Ilias breathe in the next cot. She was the only other woman in the unit and she could sleep through a mortar drill, and I stared at the poster on the wall and thought about wind drift. Hayter found me at breakfast. He was a large man, Hayter. Broad through the shoulders in a way that made you think of oxen, not unkindly. He had been in country for 8 months and he had that thing long deployments give some soldiers, a sort of compressed quality, like the person has been pared down to what matters and the rest has been left behind somewhere with their civilian clothes. He sat across from me with a tray of something that was theoretically eggs. Heard you put in for my rifle, he said. I kept eating. The second unit. Mirza confirmed it's still down. Still yours I'm talking about. I looked up. His face was not angry. It was assessing. Like he was doing the same calculation on me that Tour had done, but coming at it from a different direction. Temporarily, I said. If it gets approved at all. I heard about your analysis, he said. The ridgeline pattern. Tor told you? Tor tells me what affects my operational area. He pushed the eggs around his tray. Your numbers right? Yes. How sure? 90% on the cycle timing. Less sure on what they're moving. But, sure enough. He nodded once. Ate a forkful of eggs. I shoot left, he said. Like he was noting the weather. I know. 23% in the last range session. He said it without embarrassment. Just measurement. I know. He looked at me for a moment. Then, he stood up with his tray. I put in a secondary requisition this morning, he said. Supporting yours. I didn't say anything. My throat did something complicated. Don't miss, he said. And, walked away. The approval came at 1600, and it didn't come from Mirza's clipboard. It came from upstairs. Far enough upstairs that when Mirza came to find me, he had a different quality to his walk, careful, like he was carrying something fragile. He handed me a printed authorization form and stood there while I read it. At the bottom, where the authorizing signature line was, it didn't say Major Tour. It said Brigadier General Salim Qureshi. I read the name twice. Sir, I said, because I didn't have anything else. There's a briefing at 1800, Mirza said. He was not laughing now. He was doing something more difficult, he was looking at me with the expression of a man recalibrating. Full reconnaissance team. You're on it. I folded the paper. Put it in my breast pocket. What's the operation called? I asked. He hesitated just a beat too long. Black Talon Mark, he said. I nodded like that meant nothing to me yet. Like it was just a name. I didn't know, standing there in the late afternoon light with mud on my boots and a folded paper over my heart, that Black Talon Mark was not a new operation. That it had a file 2 inches thick. That it had been waiting for exactly this gap to close. I didn't know that the general had been watching the same ridgeline for 6 weeks. That he'd been waiting for someone to read across the logs. I found that out at 1800. The briefing room smelled like stale coffee and dry erase marker and that particular institutional anxiety that gathers in rooms where decisions with real consequences get made. There were 8 of us. I knew 5 of them. The other 2 were signals intelligence, thin, serious-looking men who sat at the far end of the folding table and didn't introduce themselves. Hader was there. He sat against the wall instead of at the table, arms crossed, shoulder rolled slightly inward. Watching. Major Tour ran the briefing. The satellite image on the screen was grainy, the grid coordinates matched exactly what I had estimated from the patrol logs, which gave me a feeling in my stomach like a key turning in a lock. The ridgeline in Khwaja Pass sector. There was a route marked in red that traced the western face, disappeared into a notch in the rock formation, and emerged on the far side near what the overlay labeled as a disused agricultural track. Confirmed movement, Tour said, on 3 successive observation cycles. Always between 0345 and 0510. 4 to 6 individuals, possibly more in the notch where visual breaks. We cannot determine from UAV whether this is a resupply route, personnel extraction, or something more significant. He clicked to the next image. What we do know is that this cycle times with a border crossing incident 3 weeks ago that resulted in the disappearance of a Pakistani army signal technician. We also know that 2 days before each observed movement, there is a specific pattern in encrypted radio traffic that our SIGINT colleagues have now isolated. He nodded at the 2 men at the far end of the table. One of them opened a folder. The traffic precedes the movement by 40 to 44 hours, the man said. Consistent. If the pattern holds, and we have reason to believe it will, the next transmission window opens in approximately 19 hours. I did the math. Movement at the ridgeline in approximately 63 hours. Tour looked at me. Khalid. Walk us through your read. I had not been told I would be presenting. My mouth went dry for exactly 1 second, and then, something settled in me, a familiar settling, the same one that happens when you go prone behind a rifle and all the noise in your head drops to one clean frequency. I stood up. The pattern has a tell, I said. It's in the duration variance. The first two observed crossings were 19 minutes end to end. The third was 26 minutes. The notch in the rock formation accounts for maybe 8 minutes if you're moving people through single file. The extra 7 minutes in the third crossing either means they had more individuals, which the size estimate doesn't support, or they stopped. I pulled the patrol log summary from my pocket. Folded it open on the table. Stopped for what? One of the sergeant men said. I don't know, I said. But, if I'm at position by 0330 and they stop in the notch again, I can see the approach angle. I can count. I can document equipment if there is any. And, if the stopping means what I think it might mean, which is? Tor said. A handoff. Something changing hands in that notch. I paused. Sir, I think we've been watching a door. I don't think we've been watching what comes through it. The room was quiet for a moment. Then, Brigadier General Salim Qureshi spoke. I had not noticed him come in. He was standing near the back wall, not at the table, in the position of someone who has been listening longer than anyone realized. He was a tall man with the close-cropped gray of someone who'd been in the field long enough that the field left marks. His uniform was not ceremonial. His boots had real mud on them. Black Talon mark, he said. Not to me specifically. To the room. This operation has been authorized under that designation. Khalid is correct in her read. We believe there is a courier route. We believe the courier is carrying signals intelligence. He paused. We need documentation, not engagement. The mission is to identify and record. Not to fire unless a direct threat to the observation team is established. He looked at me then. You'll have your rifle, Corporal. And, you will use it as a last resort. Understood, sir. Do you understand what that costs? It was not a cruel question. It was the most honest question anyone had asked me since I got to that camp. Yes, sir, I said. It costs the shot for the record. He held my look for a moment. Then, he nodded once, the same economic gesture that Tor used, and, I thought, they learned from the same place, these men. Mirza will issue the weapon at 2100. Mission launches at 2200. You'll be at position by 0300. He turned to go, then, stopped. Khalid. Sir. The laugh at the requisition desk, he said. I heard about it. I didn't know what to do with that, so I said nothing. The men who laugh, he said, are not always wrong to be surprised. Sometimes they're wrong about what to do with the surprise. He picked up his cover from the back table where he'd set it without my noticing. That's the only difference that matters. Then, he left, and the briefing continued, and I stood at that table feeling like the ground had shifted about 2 inches to the left under my feet, not unsteadily, but noticeably. The way terrain does when you've been standing on something longer than you realized. Mirza issued me the DSR-1 at 2100 without ceremony. He laid it on the table with both hands, not carefully, exactly, but with that particular attention you give to something that has weight and purpose, and then, he pushed the ammunition case beside it and stepped back. Zeroed last week, he said. Hater's settings are still on it. I'll re-zero in the morning before we go. There won't be time in the morning. Then, I'll do it now. I need 40 minutes on the range. He looked at me. Looked at the rifle. Did the recalibrating expression again? Range is yours for an hour, he said. I picked up the weapon. It was heavier than my service rifle, the good kind of heavy, the kind that tells you what it's for. The grip was worn in a place where Hater's thumb had rested for 8 months, and I noticed that the way you notice something personal when you touch someone else's belonging. An intimacy that wasn't quite yours. I carried it to the range in the dark, with a headlamp and the range log. The targets were at 300 meters and I shot 12 rounds. I made my adjustments. Shot 4 more. The last 4 groups were where I wanted them, and I noted the deviation from Hader's 0 in the log, small, but mine. Corporal Sana appeared at the edge of the range while I was clearing the weapon. She'd been told about the mission. She was going as calms, she'd be in the relay position, 2 kilometers back, running the radio link to the FOB. She was 25, Sana. From Lahore. She was the quietest person I had ever met who was also somehow the most present. She had this quality of total attention that meant when she looked at you, you felt entirely seen. She stood there until I was done. "Your groups are good," she said, looking at the target downrange. "Fourth cluster's a little high. 2 millimeters. That's a miss at distance." She smiled slightly. "Most people would call that a hit. Most people aren't going to that ridge." She was quiet for a moment. The desert night was cold in that dry, specific way, not wet cold, bone cold. The kind that comes down from the mountains and just settles in at the base of your throat. "You know what the guys have been saying," she said. "Not a question. I can guess. Some of them think tour is setting you up to fail. Making a point about why women shouldn't be in forward recon." I looked at the rifle in my hands. "What do you think?" "I think tour is more complicated than that." She paused. "I also think you won't fail." "You don't know that." "I know you re-zeroed in the dark and had 4 groups within 2 millimeters of center in under 40 minutes. She picked up the ammunition case. "I know enough." We walked back to the billet in the dark and didn't say anything else, and that was exactly the right amount of words. We left the FOB at 2200. 4 of us on the ground, me, Tour, a scout named Farouk who could move through rock terrain with the silence of something that had evolved specifically for it, and a medic called Beg whose presence I found genuinely comforting in the way you find a fire exit comforting. You don't want to need it, but it does something good to your nervous system knowing it's there. The approach was 4 kilometers. The first 2 were open ground, scrub and loose stone, cold wind at our backs. I kept the DSR-1 slung across my chest instead of on my back because I wanted to be ready to go prone fast, and the weight of it pulled at my shoulders in a way I noted without complaining about, internally or otherwise. Farouk was on point. He moved like he was reading a language in the ground that the rest of us could only half see, each step deliberate, never rushed, his body low and his head still in a way that took training to achieve and something more than training to maintain. I watched his back and matched his pace and tried to breathe through my nose. At the 2-kilometer mark we went to radio silence. This is the part nobody tells you about. Not the danger, everyone tells you about the danger. What they don't tell you is the silence. The physical quality of it, how it presses in when you cut the radio chatter and there is suddenly just the ground and the wind and the people around you and the sound of your own heartbeat doing something complicated in your ears. I had practiced silence on the range. In the field. I myself in that storage container billet at 0300. But, tactical silence, moving silence, purposeful silence with threat on the other side of it, that is its own kind of thing. It takes up residence in your body. We hit the rock field at the base of the ridge at 0130. Farouk paused. Held up a fist. We all went still. He was listening to something I couldn't hear yet. He did this for 40 seconds, I counted, and then, he opened his fist and touched 2 fingers to his eyes and pointed at a rock formation to our left. Then, he shook his head once. A goat. Bedded down in a shadow. Its eyes caught my headlamp when I swept it low and then, I saw it, small and pale and utterly indifferent to us. We moved on. The last 2 kilometers were vertical. Not technical climbing, not rope work, but relentless scrambling over loose shale that shifted under your weight in ways that required constant micro-adjustment. The rifle was heavy. My left shoulder started burning at the 15-minute mark of the climb, the muscle under the socket where the strap had cut in, and I shifted the weapon and kept moving. Tor was directly behind me. I could hear his breathing, controlled, deep, the breathing of someone who has done this enough times that the body knows the rhythm. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. We reached the observation position at 0248. 12 minutes ahead of schedule. The position was a natural shelf in the rock face, about 3 meters wide, with a lip that gave you dead space from below and a clear sightline down into the notch where the crossing route cut through the ridgeline. It was exactly as I had calculated from the map. The shape of it, the angles. It matched. I don't have a word for what that is when the real world confirms what your mind built from data. It's not triumph, exactly. It's something quieter. A kind of rightness. I went prone behind the rifle. Set up the bipod on the natural rock rest. Checked my sight picture. The notch was 340 meters, I had estimated 310 to 360, so the actual number sat in the sweet center of what I'd prepared for. Tor settled in beside me with the spotting scope. Farouk and Beg took positions on the flanks, watching the approaches. We had roughly an hour before expected movement. The cold came down hard. I mean that literally, there's a point in those mountains, usually around 0330, when the temperature drops like something has decided to make a point about it. Not gradually. It just falls. My fingers went from cool to genuinely numb in about 8 minutes, and I was wearing the right gloves, the ones with the trigger finger cutout. I pressed my palm to the rifle's receiver where the metal holds a little warmth from your body. I did this every few minutes. Steadied my breathing. Counted my heartbeat. Tor's radio, the one unit we'd kept live, set to receive only, gave a single brief crackle at 0317. Sanaa's signal. She was in position. Relay confirmed. Nothing else. The minutes went by the way minutes do in a hide, not fast, not slow, but, in a specific suspended way, like time is behaving differently at the elevation. I watched the notch through the scope. Rock face. Shadow. Wind moving something, a scrub plant, thin-stalked, nodding in the cold air at the notch's mouth. At 0341, the plant stopped nodding. No wind shift. No change in the conditions. It stopped because something was blocking it. Contact, I said. Very low. Not whispering, whispering carries further than a controlled murmur. Notch mouth. I have a figure. Tor had the spotting scope on it before I finished the sentence. 1, he said. Check left. 2. A pause. 3. They're stacked. Single file, moving slow. I had them in the scope now, not faces, not details, but shapes and motion. The way they moved told me things. The leading figure moved with the careful, scanning quality of someone who knows they're in a watched environment. Head up. Pauses. Not erratic, experienced. Fourth figure, Tor said, quiet. Different silhouette. Carrying something. Size? Small. Rectangular. A case or, he stopped. It's a case. Document case or electronics. There it was. Not cargo. Not resupply. One person, in the middle of the group, carrying something that was why all of them were there. I kept my breathing even. My finger was outside the trigger guard, resting on the guard's outer edge. Not because I was going to fire, I wasn't, but because the discipline of where your finger is tells you what you're doing. My finger outside the guard said, I am watching. I am documenting. I am not deciding anything yet. They're stopping, Tor said. They stopped in the notch. The 7 minutes. The variance. Camera, Tor said. I heard the low, controlled sound of him photographing with the scope-mounted unit. Frame after frame. The light was just sufficient. The cold pre-dawn sky does something to visibility that doesn't translate to photographs the way it does to the naked eye, but the scope's optics were rated for this. It would be enough. The figure with the case set it down. Opened it. And my whole body went rigid. Not because of threat. Because of what I saw in the scope, a specific shape, a specific size. The case was open for 31 seconds. During those 31 seconds I noted everything that I could. Shape. Dimensions. The way the figure in the notch handled what was inside. Then, it was closed. The group reassembled. They moved through the notch and out the far side and into the darkness, and in 4 minutes they were gone. My finger was still outside the trigger guard. "Tell me you got it," I said. "I got it," Tur said. "The interior." When it was open. "Frame 12 and 13, he said. "I got it." I exhaled. Long, slow, controlled. The kind of exhale that your body has been holding without telling you, and, when you let it out, the cold rushes in to replace it and your chest aches with the temperature. "What did you see?" Tur asked. He wasn't asking because he didn't see it. He was asking to confirm, to see if my read matched his without contaminating either. I moved my finger to the trigger guard. Not the trigger. Just the guard. And, then, back out. "Communications hardware," I said. "Military grade. The serial format on the casing matches Pakistani Army Signal Corps inventory." It wasn't coming in from outside. A long silence. "It was going out," Tur said. "Yes, sir." Another silence. Longer. "That changes the operation," he said. "Yes, sir." We held position for another 40 minutes, standard protocol, ensuring the route was clear. The cold went down to something that felt personal. Farouk, on the flank, shifted once and I heard the tiny sound of his boot on rock and then nothing again. When we extracted, it was 0521. First light was coming up behind the eastern peaks, gray and thin, and the world below us was beginning to take shape out of the dark, the flat scrub, the FOB in the middle distance, the mountains all around like a crowd of very old things. I carried the rifle down the rock face with my left shoulder burning and my fingers slowly, gratefully, painfully coming back to life. Tur said nothing on the extraction. Neither did I. Some things need the room to be still before you bring them into the next part of what happens. The debrief took 4 hours. I know that sounds like a long time. It was. By the end of it, the coffee in my mug had gone cold twice and the light through the briefing room's single high window had moved all the way from pale morning gray to full, flat, operational daylight. My left shoulder was making a specific complaint that I was filing away to ignore until later. General Qureshi was there for all of it. That surprised me, initially. I had expected the debrief to run through Tur, who would then run it upward. That's the standard architecture. But the general was there at the table when we came in, and he stayed, and he asked questions that made it clear he had been thinking about this particular ridgeline for considerably longer than 6 weeks. Frames 12 and 13 confirmed what Tur and I had seen. The Signals Intelligence Unit had the photographs enhanced by 0800, and the serial format I had noted on the equipment casing was verified against inventory records by 0930. 2 hours after that, the operation had been reclassified and a separate investigation team was being activated, but that part was above my classification level and I only know it happened because Tur told me, later, in the way that sometimes happens when someone decides you've earned a sentence or two of truth. But what I remember about the debrief, what stays with me when I think about that room, is not the intelligence confirmed or the investigation triggered. It's a moment that happened near the end. When all the formal business was done and the SIGINT men had closed their folders and Tur was wrapping the last of his notes. General Qureshi looked at me and said, "Walk me through your read. From the beginning. Not the mission, from the moment you first started looking at those patrol logs. Why you started. What you were looking for." Everyone else in the room went quiet. I looked at him. At this man with mud on his boots and close-cropped gray and for stars worth of weight in his posture that he carried like it had been there so long it was just part of his skeleton now. "I wasn't looking for anything specific, sir," I said. "I was filling time. Reading the logs because they were available and I stopped." "Go ahead," he said. "I needed to feel useful," I said. I had been sidelined from field rotation 3 times since arriving in country. Administrative reasons. And I needed to feel like I was doing something that mattered, even if it was just reading. He nodded. Not sympathetically, not the soft, careful nod of someone trying to acknowledge your feelings. The other kind. The nod of someone filing information. And when the pattern emerged, I didn't trust it at first, I said. I thought I was seeing something because I wanted to see something. So I ran the numbers again independently. Same result. I ran them a third time with different variables and the pattern held. At that point I thought, someone needs to know this. And I thought about who to tell, and I thought about the DSR-1, and both of those thoughts arrived at the same time. Why the DSR-1? Because knowing a pattern isn't the same as understanding it, I said. I needed to see what was in that notch. And the notch was 340 meters on a ridgeline at 0400 in winter, and a service rifle doesn't answer that question. Qureshi looked at me for a long, still moment. How many people laughed at your requisition? He asked. Sir? At the desk. And, after. How many? I thought about it honestly. For that I heard. Probably more that I didn't. Were they bad soldiers? The question surprised me. No, sir. Most of them are very good soldiers. Then, what were they doing wrong? I thought about this for longer than the first question. The room was quiet. Tor had his pen down. Even the Sigint men were listening. They were using the wrong information, I said finally. They knew I was a woman. They knew the DSR-1 was a sniper rifle. They put those two facts together and treated the conclusion as self-evident. They skipped the step where you check the other information. Which other information? Whether I could shoot, I said. He almost smiled. Not quite. The edge of it. That's correct, he said. Pattern recognition is only as good as the data set you apply it to. They had an incomplete data set. He pushed back his chair, preparing to stand. The answer to an incomplete data set is not louder pattern recognition. It is more data. You provided more data. He stood. Picked up his cover. Black Talon mark is closed as of this morning, he said to the room. The subsequent investigation is active and compartmentalized. You will be briefed on a need-to-know basis going forward. He looked at me one more time. Well done, Corporal. Then, he left. The room exhaled. Hayter was waiting outside. Not waiting for the debrief to end, I don't think he knew when it would end. He was just there, sitting on an upturned crate in the weak morning sun outside the briefing room door, cleaning his rifle in that focused, methodical way he had. His left shoulder rolled inward. Still sore. He looked up when I came out. I handed him the DSR-1. Held it out with both hands. He looked at it. Then, at me. Then, he took it two-handed, the same way Mirza had laid it on the table 2 days ago. Hayter's setting still on it, he said. I put yours back, I said. I noted my deviation in the range log. You'll want to review and re-zero to confirm, but I put your settings back. He looked down at the rifle. Worked the action once, checked the chamber. What did you see on the ridge, he said. I can't brief you on the classified elements. Not asking about the classified elements. He looked up. I'm asking what you saw on the ridge. I understood the difference. He meant the other thing. The thing that isn't in the debrief. Cold, I said. Serious cold. My fingers were gone by 0300. Yeah. And the notch when I had them in the scope. The way they moved. I thought about how to say it. They were scared too. The people on that ridgeline. Not shaking scared. The low kind. The kind where your body has been in danger long enough that it just lives there. Carrying that case. Carrying that case. Hayter nodded slowly. That's always the thing, isn't it, he said. Everybody out there is carrying something. He stood up from the crate, rifle in hand, and rolled his left shoulder carefully. My physio appointment is in an hour, he said. I might be back on the range by next week. Good, I said. Your groups were clean, he said. I looked at the range log. Second cluster was high. 2 millimeters. That's what Sana said. She's right, he said. And walked toward the medical building. I slept for 11 hours. I know because I looked at my watch when I lay down 13:20, and then I opened my eyes and it was 0025, and the camp was in that particular night quiet that sits differently from day quiet, fuller somehow, more occupied. Sana was asleep in the next cot. She'd come back from her relay position hours before me, had done her own debrief with the comms unit, and now she was completely motionless in the way of someone who has turned their body over to sleep entirely. I lay on my back and looked at the ceiling. The safety poster was still half curled at the corner. Somebody had taped the curled part back down at some point recently, a fresh bit of tape, and I stared at that bit of tape for a while, that small act of someone trying to make a temporary place a little more permanent. I thought about the figure in the notch with the case. The way they'd set it down. The 31 seconds it was open. The way their hands moved, not rough, not careless. Careful. The hands of someone who understood the value of what they were carrying. I thought about the fact that this person was, right now, somewhere on the other side of those mountains, not knowing that frames 12 and 13 existed. Not knowing that the investigation was active. I thought about what it means to watch a human being do a harmful thing and not stop them. To document instead of act. To hold the patience and the discipline of the long game. I thought about my finger outside the trigger guard. This is the part that nobody tells you. Not the shot, it's easy to mythologize the shot, the moment of decision, the moral weight of it. The real thing is what it feels like to not take the shot. To have it available, to have it clear and possible, and to make the choice that the mission requires a different kind of courage. I had not fired a single round on that ridge. And that was the job. I thought about my father. The smell of gun oil. The long afternoons on the range, brass casings on the ground, his voice behind me, it's a physics problem, Zara. Listen to what the distance is telling you. I thought about what he would say if I called him. If I told him that his daughter had spent a night on a ridgeline in the dark and come back with photographs instead of a kill count. I thought he would understand. I thought he would nod the way General Qureshi had nodded, the filing kind, not the soft kind. I thought about the officers' program. The 3 applications. The board of 4 men. I thought, there are different ways to prove a thing. There are different kinds of doors. I thought about the folded authorization paper that was still in my breast pocket. I hadn't taken it out. I'd worn the same jacket all day, through the debrief, and the paper was still there. I could feel it when I pressed my hand to my chest. Black Talon mark. Authorizing Officer, Brig Gen. Salim Qureshi. I pressed my hand to my chest and felt the paper and looked at the safety poster on the wall. Then, I got up. Put on my boots. Laced them carefully, the way you do when you're buying yourself time to think about something. I went outside. The camp at 0100 is a different country from the camp at noon. The sharp edges are all gone, the compound walls and the vehicles and the equipment stacks are all just shapes in the dark. The mountains to the northwest are invisible but present, the way they always are, the way something very large and very old is always present even when you can't see it. There was a soldier on perimeter duty. I didn't know him, a young face under his patrol cap, maybe 20, maybe younger. He nodded when I came out. I nodded back. I walked to the range. I didn't take a rifle. I stood at the line and looked down to where the targets were, invisible in the dark, 300 meters away. I thought about what Tor had said to me on the extraction, when we were halfway down the rock face and my left shoulder was on fire and the first light was just starting to gray the eastern sky. He'd said it quietly, without stopping, without looking at me, the voice of someone making a report rather than a statement. You read the data correctly. Every step of it. The logs, the pattern, the notch, the variant. Every single call. I had not said anything in response. I had kept climbing. But, here, alone on the range in the dark, I said it out loud to the empty air in front of me, I know. Not arrogantly. Not even triumphantly. The way you say something when you've been waiting a long time to say it and the waiting is over. I know. 3 weeks later, my name was submitted for consideration for the Advanced Marksman program. The submission came from Tour. The supporting documentation included the range logs, the mission record, and a separate letter from Brigadier General Qureshi that I was not permitted to read. Tour told me it existed. He didn't tell me what it said. I was accepted on a Tuesday. Mirza delivered the notification, same as he'd delivered everything on foot, in person, slightly reluctant to show what he was feeling about it. He handed me the paper and stood there while I read it. "Congratulations," he said. It came out sincere, which I think surprised him. "Thank you, Sergeant," I said. He nodded. Turned to go. Then, stopped. "That first morning," he said. "At the desk." "I know," I said. "It's fine." He started. "It's fine," I said again. Because it was. Not because I'd forgotten it or decided it didn't matter, I hadn't, and it did, but because the right answer to a man recalibrating in good faith is to let him recalibrate. The laugh was wrong. His walking it back was right. Both things were true. I could hold both. He nodded again and left, and I stood there with the notification paper in my hand, in the same muddy compound, under the same sky. The mountains to the northwest were very clear that day. Cold air, no haze, you could see the definition of each peak, the way they folded into each other, the dark notches in the ridgelines. I looked at them for a while. I thought about the figure with the case. Where they were now. Whether the investigation had found what it was looking for. I thought about frames 12 and 13. I thought about 31 seconds in a notch at 340 meters in winter darkness, and a trigger finger resting on the guard, and the discipline of the long game. I thought about my grandmother, who said our family grew in parade formation, and whether she knew how many different ways there are to march. I folded the notification paper. Put it in my breast pocket, where the other paper had been. 2 papers now. Same pocket. Different weights. I had a physical training session at 0630. I had range time at 1400. I had reading to do. The Advanced Marksman Program preliminary materials had arrived with the notification, a stack of technical literature on long-range optics and environmental calculation that I had already started annotating in the margins. I had work. I laced my boots and went back inside. Reflection: I've been asked, since then, what it felt like to be the one who laughed, at least tried to understand. The honest answer is, I was angrier than I showed. I was angrier than I think I even let myself feel fully in the moment, because anger is expensive when you need to function, and I needed to function. There is a particular variety of exhaustion that comes from spending your energy on proving you belong in a space that should simply have let you in, and that exhaustion is real and it accumulates and it does not disappear just because you eventually get the rifle. But, here is also true, Hader submitted the secondary requisition. Tour gave me the floor in the briefing. A general whose boots had real mud on them came and stood at the back of the room and listened to me read data. Sana said I know enough in the dark on the range and carried the ammunition case without being asked. There is not a clean story here. There is not a moment where everything resolved into the right shape and everyone learned the right lesson and the institution became what it should be. That is not how it goes. What there is, a ridge at 340 meters. A notch in the rock. 31 seconds with the case open. Frames 12 and 13. An investigation that needed what I could see from that position, and a decision made by me, confirmed by the math, validated by the data about what I was capable of and what the mission required. And a finger resting on the guard, not the trigger. Knowing the difference between those two things, when to hold and when to act, when the discipline is patience and when the discipline is the shot, that is what all those afternoons on the range were building toward. That is what the brass casings on the ground and the bruised shoulder and the 3 applications were for. My name is Lance Corporal Zara Khalid. I was 23 years old, and it was raining, and somebody laughed. And then I did the work.